Okay, welcome to part 4 of the OwlBot project, where we're going to be upgrading the power supply to our OwlBot prototype circuit. As you can see here, we have the prototype circuit set up on the Ultimate DIY 3220 point breadboard, or 2D. I have 2D right here. This was a previous project build that you can try out yourself if you'd like to. If not, I give instruction on how to set up this prototype circuit for the OwlBot in complete detail on the blog post project series. I'll leave the description or the link to the description down below. But like I said, for this part 4, we're going to be upgrading the power supply. And the reason why we want to do that is because in part 5, the next part of this build series, we're going to be adding a DC motor. As you can see, I already have it set up here, and a couple of solenoids. So the 2D here has an onboard 9-volt battery power supply, or if you're using just a generic breadboard, we've been using a 9-volt battery supply to provide power for both the Arduino and the MP3 player that we installed in part 2 of the project, and the LEDs that we installed on our prototype circuit in part 3 of the project. So later we're going to want to add the DC motor and the solenoids, but having a single 9-volt battery power supply isn't going to really quite cut it to power everything that we have currently and what we want to add on in the future or in the future builds. So in order to provide the power that we will need, especially for the DC motor and the solenoids, we're going to need to add another source or another way to provide power for everything. And the way that I'm going to be doing it for part 4 here of this project build series for the OwlBot project, I'm going to add a secondary power supply. And what I'm going to use is this battery pack that holds 6 AA batteries. This one already has the batteries installed in it, and this particular type of AA battery pack has a convenient 9-volt battery snap connector. So the 6 batteries makes up 9 volts. This particular battery pack has the 9-volt battery snap connector, which in the future, when installing this inside the body of the owl figure that we're going to be using, if you just give me a second, I'll grab that. So in the future, we're going to stick everything inside this owl figure. He's kind of too big to put them all into the camera shot right now, but we want to have something that would be easily installed inside that owl figure, and something like this would be fine. And in order to change the batteries out in the future, it's much easier to have something like this, where you can just snap that off, take this out, change your batteries, and then snap it back in. And of course, these wires will be attached to the rest of the circuit of the OwlBot. So before I jump into this, as that was mentioned on the blog post for part 4 of the OwlBot project, we needed to add a couple of jumper wires in order to create a common ground for the entire prototype circuit. So here we have the 9-volt battery power supply, and in part 1 I showed you, at least from 2D and for a generic breadboard if you're using that we connected the plus and minus supply of the 9-volt battery to the main power rails here, and this is the negative supply here. You can see that there's a blue jumper wire to connect the rest of this these points here on this rail. Here I've added a white jumper wire that goes from the negative supply of the main power rail from the 9-volt battery power supply to this rail here. And this is the negative supply, or I've created the negative supply on this rail. Along here, you can kind of see that black jumper wire that connects the rest of this negative supply here and all the negative points that we'll make for the other circuitry that we'll add later. That circuitry is actually hidden underneath this peer sensor right now, so you'll get to see that in part 5 of this build. And I've also added this other white jumper wire right here, and it's also connected to the same negative rail here, and it's continued through this jumper wire to this other negative rail on this side, where we added the negative supply for both the Arduino and the MP3 player, and also the LEDs. So this negative supply rail here that we added in, I believe, either part 2, I think in part 2 of the build, and then this new connected negative supply rail that we're doing in this part of the project, and the main negative side of, or the main rail for the negative side from the 9-volt battery power supply is all connected. So we've created a common ground throughout. So just going back over it once again, this black wire here is representative of my negative supply from the onboard 9-volt battery power supply on 2D. That negative supply is continued to this main power rail here and continues through this blue jumper wire all the way down to this white jumper wire and continued on to this white jumper wire. So both of these white jumper wires go to either side of this breadboard here, this negative rail here, and this negative rail on this side. And these negative rails are connected all throughout, up and down. So all of these are connected to create a common ground, and we need a common ground for the prototype circuit to work properly. And all that's explained in the blog post. Again, I'll leave that in the description below for this part 4 of the OwlBot project build series. So that was one of the first things that we needed to set up for this part before we add our secondary power supply, which again, I'm using a 6-pack of AA batteries. And all I will need to do next is that I'll need to connect the positive to, I'm connecting it to this side rail, and I'm connecting the negative to the negative rail for this new power supply rail on this side of this breadboard that we're using on this end of 2D. So to recap, for all that we're doing for part 4 of this build is that we are creating a common ground. So again, this comes from the negative supply of the 9-volt battery. It's connected on this main power rail here on the negative rail. There's a jumper wire to connect this rail here, and also this jumper wire over here to connect this negative rail that we set up in the previous parts of the build, so that all the negatives are connected together to create a common ground. And then next, all we needed to do was grab our secondary power supply. In this case, I'm using a 6 AA battery pack and connecting its positive to the positive rail to this new power rail that we're creating here. And I'm connecting the negative line, which is this black wire from the battery pack, to the negative rail here. So this new rail here that we're creating for the new 9-volt battery power supply with the 6 AA batteries is going to create a better, more stable power supply for the solenoids and the DC motor that we'll add in the next part of this build for part 5. So we have our 9-volt battery power supply that we set up in part 1 of the project. We have our secondary 9-volt battery power supply that is made up of 6 AA batteries, and that's its rail here, and this is the rail that we're going to use for the DC motor and the 2 solenoids later in the project. And we still have this is our 5-volt power supply rail that comes directly from the 5-volt supply of the Arduino. And again, the Arduino we hooked up to the 9-volt battery power supply here. So that's all we're doing for part 4. I just wanted to create this quick video in order to kind of explain verbally what we're doing. You can get the complete instructions for this part of the build and for the previous parts of the build down in the links down in the description below. I'll leave that for you so it's easier for you to find where all that is. So next up, we're going to be adding this DC motor and the 2 solenoids, and then we'll move on from there to work our way into completing the OwlBot project, and hopefully sometime soon we can add all of this stuff inside this guy here. So I want to thank you for watching, and stay tuned for part 5 of the OwlBot project, where again we'll be adding the mechanical movements for our OwlBot prototype circuit, the DC motor and the 2 solenoids. So I'll see you next time. Take care, and remember to keep at it and stay motivated.